Right, good afternoon, folks. Welcome to Crash, Cambridge Centre for Research in the Arts, Social Sciences and Humanities. Thank you for coming in such impressive numbers. When we first put this event up on talks.cam, it sold out in 2 days. And somebody who hadn't got on the list came to me and complained that he didn't realise this was going to be such a hot ticket. He wasn't referring, alas, to the climate. This is a hot ticket in more ways than one. Now we're gathered here this afternoon for a rather special and unusual event, which is the launch of a book on the work of one of the great scholars of our time, Bruno Latour, by his friend and fellow philosopher Geert de Vries. We will also, I hope, gain some insight into what it's like to have one's life work dissected by a friend in a single volume, and to hear how Professor Latour himself views the arc of his remarkable intellectual journey. The structure of the event is really very simple. First of all, Bruno will give a short talk about the remarkable exhibition he recently curated in Karlsruhe. Then Geert will present him with the first copy of the book and say a few words. After that, I will attempt to moderate a conversation between our two philosophers, and then between them and you, the audience. And finally, we will repair to the atrium outside for drinks and nibbles. Because there's so many people here, we had to organise some kind of live streaming of the event to other parts of the building. And indeed, we have arranged that. There is, however, one interesting quirk in it, which is that there is a slight delay on the screen. Which means that if God forbid, but if there are any jokes in this room, then after a suitable delay, you will hear the explosion in another room. Now, our two stars, Geert de Vries is a well-known philosopher of science who has taught at the universities of Twente, Groningen, Maastricht and Amsterdam. And apart from his scholarly work, one of his remarkable qualities is his lifelong belief in the usefulness of philosophical thinking about public issues. And in that sense, I guess he's one of Holland's foremost public intellectuals. His most recent position from 2004 until 2014 was as a member of the Scientific Council for Government Policy in The Hague, where he got to put that philosophy of his into operation. This council is an unusual, I think probably unique body. It's a totally independent advisory body for government policy. Its mission is to advise the Dutch government on issues that are of great importance to society, and by law, the government has to respond to its reports. Two of the high-profile reports that Geert has worked on concerns societal management of risk and, most recently, food security. And if you're confident about the security of our food, I recommend that you read this report. In 2014, he was appointed Knight of the Order of the Lion of the Netherlands for his exceptional achievements with the sciences, social sciences and humanities. This high distinction, which is equivalent to a British knighthood, was also given to him for the outstanding way, this is what the citation says, in which he has used his scholarly knowledge for society and for his contributions to the education and training of students and young scholars. But for the purposes of this evening, his most important qualification is that he knew Bruno Latour before Bruno was cool. Which brings me to Bruno. It's a cliche to say that a speaker needs no introduction, and the size of this audience tends to confirm that. But for anyone who has been vacationing on Mars, here's a short summary. There are a few scholars in any generation who can, as it were, stop the traffic in this town, and Professor Latour is one of those. Another one, in my experience, is Noam Chomsky. For more than 4 decades, he has been a leading light in the field of science studies. Indeed, as one scholar has observed, his writings effectively chart the course of this discipline, a discipline that uses the methods of the social and human sciences to understand how humans go about their scientific and technological pursuits. Professor Latour started famously by using ethnographic methods and philosophical tools to understand how scientific knowledge is created, an approach that was summed up by the title of his celebrated book that he and Steve Woolgar published in 1979, Laboratory Life, the Social Construction of Scientific Facts. But the study of laboratory life did not detain him long, and over his career he has found new ways of understanding and analysing an astonishing range of scientific, technological and societal subjects, from microbiology to transportation technology to urban planning, to religion, and even to judicial systems. In some ways, you could say that Bruno Latour has never encountered a disciplinary boundary that he did not wish to violate. He's long been a good friend of Crash, and it's lovely to have him back here with us again. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give him a warm welcome. Bruno.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Thank you to Crash for having me again, and of course, thank you to Gerard. As you can imagine, it's slightly embarrassing to be the object of a book. So I chose a topic which is not in the book, and a genre which is curating exhibition, which is only very marginally in the book. As you can imagine, in 211 pages, Gerard managed to summarize maybe 5,000-page work. So I had to sort of escape the efficiency of Gerard's book. And I chose to talk about a project of mine which is, in fact, a continuation of the work I did on the work on the mode of existence project, which is to find a way of operationalizing, if you can say that, the diplomatic encounter imagined into the inquiry into mode of existence. So my slides here are just to entertain you before we discuss with Gerard. And I chose a series of problems which I'm very concerned by, which I thought was a way of simultaneously thanking Gerard for his work and not repeating things that he will say in the discussion. I'm very interested in the end of the COP21st meeting in Paris, and especially because of his extraordinary invocation at the end by François Hollande, president of France, which, precisely not known for being a philosopher, which is to have linked the United Nations, France, and the planet in the same word, which is very telling for me, because planet is not supposed to be something which is so fragile that you have to say vive hurrah to the planet. This is something you do for United Nations because you're not sure it's going to last. This is something you do for your football club because you're not sure it's going to win. But it's not something you do for the planet, or at least it's not something you used to do for the planet. So there is an integration of a notion that the planet has become a fragile political body of some sort which can fail, so to speak, and which is in the same sort of league as the United Nations and France, two very weak sort of states. I mean, not as weak as England, but that's another matter. So the problem is that, which was very well shown at the COP21st, is that basically the ideal of what I will call the globe, which modernizing movement had been considering for a few centuries, was not achievable for a very simple reason, which was not as clear, but it became very clear in the 11th December 2015, which is there is no planet corresponding to the globe. So this is why we got interested, and I got interested in imagining a third attractor, and this is what I'm very interested in doing now, trying to see if we can shift the attention of political energy, so to speak, between not two attractors, which the usual land, the local, and the local, as you know, is an imagined community, especially now. The globe, which was supposed to be where we would move on if we were modernizing one another, so basically going from attractor 1 to attractor 2, that is basically discussing if we are progressive or reactionary according to the fact that we move from 1 to 2 or in the opposite direction, which is basically a way to summarize many things we have been doing around the question of the modernity, is that the way we attribute progressiveness or reactionary. Now, the difficulty is all of that is predicated on the fact that there is actually a globe, that is actually a landing strip on which you can actually, to which you can actually arrive. But the way the COP21st ended up, when they asked for 189 nations how they imagine the view from their economy in 20 years or 30 years, when you made the sum, and this was the day before the end of the meeting, when you make the sum, there is no planet corresponding to that sum. So basically, you have 180 nations deciding on the future, which has no space, basically. Which, of course, is interesting because of the reaction, which is, in a way, that's my interpretation. I'm not a political scientist, but I think here in England you can understand the situation. Most people now feel that way, that there is no way to globalize the planet, right? So the temptation is, of course, to go, well, let's go to the attractor one, the land of all, and let's sort of fall back on at least what we knew, which is the nation state, whatever it's called, and inside the border and the identity, which is the traditional identity. So I think the political situation in terms of a zeitgeist is that we sort of know that the two landing strips, which have organized the modernity argument, the globe to which we cannot go anymore because there is no planet corresponding, and the land of all where we, some of us, some of the other guys, we are now very badly designated by Mrs. Clinton as deplorable, but it's actually, it is very deplorable, but it's completely understandable that there is no land either to go back to, right? The land, I will use only French example, the land to which Madame Le Pen wants to bring France back doesn't exist more than the land to which the Polish people wants, the present government of Poland wants to go back, and so on and so forth. So the question now becomes, can we reorganize or reorient and redesign and rethink of what is progressive and reactionary, not according to the 1-2 attractors line, but to this other line, which is called the Earth, which has very, very different characteristics as the globe. And that's what I want to try to convey to you very briefly. We are basically divided because we don't know how to sort of anticipate who is progressive and reactionary compared to these three attractors, and we mix the three together, not knowing if it's reactionary back, so we are a bit all lost. So this is why it's time for a reset. Now, and this is why I use the medium of the exhibition, so it's not the papers and fieldwork and books which I wrote and which are being kindly summarized and developed in Gerhard's book, but another medium which I like very much. This is the third time I managed to do an exhibition, which is curating an exhibition and building a space where experience can be shared with the visitors in a way which cannot be done with any other medium in my view. So this is a show which has been closed a few weeks ago in ZKM in Karlsruhe, which is an amazing industrial building itself. So the space itself is extremely interesting. And it is a reset. So the metaphor of reset is, of course, disputable. But it's important because the argument is that since we have never been modern, which I take for granted, it means that we register continuously sort of disjunct or strange message or attitude or signals, and we don't have the instrument to sort of record them and register them. So the difficulty that we have as this sort of strange situation of having been modern without ever having been modern is that we are sort of disturbed by the signals that we get about the way the world is built, and especially we have difficulty knowing where we are, which land, is it the globe or the land, and when we are, which is, of course, the big question, which is around this notion of the Anthropocene I will mention in a minute. So the argument of a reset is to say, okay, let's try to sort of, like you do with a very simple metaphor of instrument, after you have made a measurement, you need to reset the scale for instance to get another measurement. We are not able to register the experience which we have. This is the metaphor of a reset. It's not a tabula rasa, it's not a revolution, it's not even really reflexive. It's, okay, let's recalibrate the same way we do with our mobile phone when we lose the signal. Let's reset it, and then after that we might get the signal or not. And we built in the show a very elaborate procedure of exploration with asking the visitors of the show to work, actually. So it was not an art show where people can pass. I mean, they can do that if they want, but the whole idea was that they had to work in the show using this little guidebook, which is there, and you see there, a few minutes before the end of the show, I took these pictures of this very nice couple who were very seriously reading through the little leaflet and trying to work out how the show was built, after people had told us that this is too pedagogical, that no one would be interested in going through the reading. And it was not actually true. People love to be able to work, actually, in a show and be somewhat directed, so to speak. So it is actually one of the things you can do with an exhibition. And of course, what is beautiful in a show is the space. You build a space, an ad hoc space, only for a few months, unfortunately. And this is one of the beautiful things that John Palmesino, which is from Territorial Agency, had built. And I'll come back to that. It's a magnificent set of print about the oil exploitation in different parts of the world. So in this work, we simultaneously, and that's something which is, of course, very difficult to do in a show, which is simultaneously to get the argument through a set of documentation, and we use a large amount of documentation, which is also in the catalog of MIT Press, with, and in a very sort of uncertain and interesting relation with the works of art which had been mobilized by the curators and me. So the idea was not, so of course people say, oh, it means it's an exhibition of ideas. Well, of course, it's what we call with Peter Weibel a thought exhibition. So it's like a thought experiment. You do something you cannot possibly do with the normal ways of mounting or staging an idea, like exactly people do traditionally in philosophy of science with thought experiment. Here it's a thought exhibition. So you build a space, an artificial space, but you do actually experiment. You do actually obtain results you couldn't do otherwise. And it's very interesting to multiply. I'm saying that in case there are people interested in curating here. It's very interesting to use the space of the shows to do a collective workshop. So we had many schools coming, many work, and we actually managed also a lot of feedback during the exhibition to see if the procedure of research worked or not. Because the set of procedure, if it doesn't work, you know immediately, because people say, this is, I don't feel, I don't hear, I don't get the signal. So the fact of saying, well, you need new sort of tuning to get the instrument to register things that you couldn't do before, the proof is immediately in the show, which is very nice. When you write a book, you very rarely hear about how people react to your book. But when you do an exhibition, it's immediately people get, say, this is ridiculous, I don't hear, don't get the signal, this doesn't work. So it has a very experimental side, which is very important. So the reset, we chose to do it with 6 different procedures. I'm not going to bore you with all of them. Take only 3, which is the 3 first procedures. And by procedure, we mean exactly what you do when you have to recalibrate an instrument so that it registers again differences which were not registerable before. So, and you get an idea of the space in which this was done. What it was very funny is that by chance, I have no idea why it was there, on top of the same show, there was another exhibition by Peter Weibel on the Vienna Circle. And of course, it was not as good a show, but it was immensely interesting to see really on the top of so looking down on us, if you say, the Vienna Circle, all white, dead white men were watching what we were doing again, messing up with modernity. And it was extremely interesting because, of course, modernity has always been reset. So the more you compare reset mechanism, the more interesting it was, and the contrast was quite interesting. So the first procedure will not come to a surprise to any one of you here, and especially if you're in history of science and STS, is the relocalizing of the global. I mean, the sort of obsession with the globe, and this obsession of the globe, which is actually capturing too much imagination, mythology, and so on in too much of a figure, of a myth, basically, to be usable, especially because what we wanted to contrast is the cartographic globe, which is a very powerful, as many historians of geography knows, way to register as many differences as possible, with the globe of globalization, which has only the name in common with the globe of cartography. And because the globe of globalization is not the registering of differences with a very simple set of coordinates, it's exactly the opposite, which is the extension of a provincial definition of what the world is like to as many places as possible. So we have in the notion of globalization a sort of complete mistake or a mixed of two different definitions of the globe, which are opposite to one another, which is why the people who are moving toward the globe are always surprised by the lack of differences which this supposedly global view has. So it's a provincial definition of what it is, what the common world is, which is a very one of the reasons why the difficulty of thinking globally is, because if thinking globally is having a provincial definition of the globe, it's not very interesting. So I'm passing quickly because it's a cliche, but it's obvious that there is a sort of wrong idea around this idea of a blue planet and the fact that it's prematurely unified. We all know the difficulty of having this image of a blue planet. Historians of science have shown that, but also the difficulty that it represents actually nothing of the energy and movement and flows of the Earth, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But also because it's simultaneously accumulating lots of completely different types of globes, and there are too many of them, so to speak. So that when we talk about the globalization, we never know which global layers, so to speak, we are considering, and the whole thing is thrown in this idea of a blue planet, which is supposed to sort of unify all of us, as if nature was able to unify politics. So it's a premature unification, which is in fact very dangerous. The second procedure, and I'll go fast, is of course again a cliche of history of science and philosophy and art history, which is this difference between within and without the world, which is one of the difficulties why we have so much problem registering what could be called, grossly speaking, the ecological question, which is this idea that we are actually looking at an object and that inventing the scenography of the object subject, a topic of much philosophical discussion, but which is very well taken now by historians of art and anthropologists of art, like what Philippe Descola is now doing in Paris. You get an idea of a show here of the way it's organized. You have a Thomas Truth image. I'll come back when two Jeff Wall, and in the room there inside you have an amazing film by Taylor and Paravel called Leviathan, which is an experiment, a film experiment, and a completely different ways of holding the camera and the sort of classical gaze, so to speak. So this is the sort of thing you can do only in an exhibition, which is that because you move through that space and go from one work of art to the documentation, back to another work of art, enter the room, you sort of feel the difference in the way you register the question of classical question of subject object, which is the reason why we look at ecological question or catastrophe in general, in this case the refugee as well as ecology mixed together in one of the classic of the 19th century painting at a distance. But for that you need to build the distance, as many historians of art have shown, and everybody knows this classic building of the imagery in the Dürer, but many feminists have been extremely interested in the fact that the object is actually invented through a woman's body, which is supposed to be the object of a gaze. What is interesting here and what we wanted to highlight is actually the building of this sort of grid, which allows the invention of not only of a gaze, which is of course very often what historians of art look at, but the object. It's a very strange role given to the object in this history of painting, which has then influenced philosophy so much. This is an old argument of mine, which is now taken up by Descola's work on images, is that naturalism, as he called it, is largely a creation of painting. And none of the painting is actually better for me than this Jeff Wall, I was going to say painting, photography or works of art, Adrian Walker, which is a beautiful and disputed what I call and take as a memento mori, but he takes as actually a beautiful ways of celebrating depiction. He called it a celebration of depiction. I call it the end of modernism, modern empiricism, so to speak, because of a sort of tired ways in which Adrian Walker is looking at his painting. But most interesting, what happened to the object there, which is a very odd way for an object to exist. It's a mummy, it's an arm mummy, dead. I mean, it's hard to be deader than a mummy, right? And it's not even a complete body, so it's actually a severed dead body. There was an exhibition in Anita's museum a few years ago about the body. And it's actually interesting to see that, of course, the arms is doing writing as well. I mean, the two arms are actually symmetric. But what is interesting is to imagine the frame here in the middle, that is the grid. The grid is actually transformed by the beautiful idea of Jeff Hall in the way the how do you call that? The ceramics are built. So what is interesting here, which I ask a student of mine to summarize, is this invention. It's possible to get to the invention of a gaze by looking again at the way this frame is being built, just like in the Dürer, inventing, of course, something we know very well, which is that the gaze is very strange. This is in Panofsky's, I mean, it's an old cliché of art history. But what we forget is how strange is the object role which is given, which is to be stopped, an interrupted object in the middle of its own trajectory for being looked at by a very strange, limited gaze. And that's, I think, the best description of the Western gaze, even though it's done by a student of mine. I think it's exactly realist. The Western gaze is this little thing on a pod there, one eye, as Panofsky showed, suspended, fixed at a distance. But what happened to the other side is also very interesting. And the most interesting is Le Corbusier's role. I mean, why is it Le Corbusier? It doesn't matter. I think he just took it. He was an architect, the guy who did this. And in the middle of a frame, and he's actually the instance of a function that actually organizes the link between the subject and the object, which is a very strange position and very important philosophically, which is, of course, another proof, but do we need another proof? That object-subject is not native, it's not a sort of normal metaphysics, it's a very, very odd naturalist, very specific to a certain type of art history, which is not surprising only because of the role given to the gaze of a subject, but what is most extraordinary is the role given to the object. Objects are not in the world that way. I mean, it's very strange to be registering objecthood, so to speak, in this the set of devices. This is, of course, beautifully shown in Paravel and Taylor's work. The third one was an interesting in the question of the sublime, which is actually now in ecological dispute a very interesting topic, because sublime, as you know, was built on three features. The distance, you were not supposed to be touched by a spectacle. It has to be a spectacle, just like in the print before. You have to feel that you are very small compared to the immense weight and immense power of nature. And you have to feel very big, because when you look at your consciousness, you're immensely bigger than all these things, which are just dead matter. I mean, I'm just commenting on famous piece by Kant. Now, we were interested in making people experiment in the show is that these three features are actually lost in the situation where we have entered. That is, we are no longer distant, because if you feel that this, for instance, this tornado is coming to you, it's completely impossible to play the Kantian role of being looking at it as a sublime thing, because you just protect yourself, right? But the two others are even more extraordinary, because what it is to be small, if you have actually a role in this, at least an energetic role, in the arrival of that sort of phenomena in the Mediterranean, where this print has been taken by Armin Linke, where it didn't exist before. So you don't, certainly, how could you register the sublime if you are the same size, so to speak, as the phenomena coming to you, which doesn't work with the Kantian sort of tripartite argument. And as to the third one, which is you're supposed to feel much bigger and much taller by your consciousness and your soul than the dead matter, it doesn't work either. Because if there is something for which we are fairly puny, small, is our complete lack of activity when we hear all these things about, for instance, that we are the sixth extinction, or that we play the role of a glacier, or that we are a meteorite, all this sort of thing don't sort of plead for the greatness of our soul. So this is a typical case what you can do in an exhibition, which is to assemble people around a set of slightly different print and works of art and make them work. For instance, here you see a very non-sublime pictures by François Giraud, which is a print taken in Fukushima, which is itself a radioactive print of which is made with the earth of Fukushima, and which is itself radioactive and is very small. So it's absolutely impossible to get there and see, wow, so fabulous, because it's protected by a very thick glass, so that you have to protect the guy who look at this very small image against the radioactivity, which is also pictures in the work of art. So all of the thing here, and this is a work by Jan Zalasiewicz, who is the head of an Anthropocene group, which had invented, how could I say that, invented fossils, which were the sort of Anthropocene fossil, which would be seen in the future by future Jan Zalasiewicz in a few thousand years, and who would look at it. And there is actually wrote a whole paper about the discovery of those fossils by the future Zalasiewicz, trying to interpret what had happened there. So it's, of course, people in the show could say, no, I don't feel, I mean, I still feel the sublime because it's so beautiful to see all this radioactivity going out. But the three features of distance, protection, small size, and great soul are actually slightly disturbed right now. But we can do the test in the discussion. Do you still feel ecological sublime or not? We can extend the experiment of the exhibition in this room if we need to do it. Now, the other thing that we can do in the exhibition is, of course, to get also the feeling of what it is to land, which is, of course, the question I'm interested, if you follow these three different attraction points, where do we land if it's not the globe toward which we were actually moving, and if it's not the land of old where we cannot go back again? So, of course, you get also that physically in the way the show is organized, but of course it's difficult to show that with just a few slides. But what I'm interested now, if I have a few, do I have a few more minutes of that? Which is a question now, forget about the exhibition, trying to understand now, how do we shape this third attractor? What is its quality? Which is very odd compared to the quality that the globe was supposed to have, the cartographic as well as the globalization. Oliver Morton, in a very important book called The Planet We Made, I think made the point beautifully. And for philosophers, the quote is even more extraordinary. The paradox of the Anthropocene, basically, in a nutshell is this: humans are grown so powerful that they have become a force of nature. So this is the thing that is not in Kant. In Kant, you are not supposed to be at the same size as a force of nature. And forces of nature are those things which, by definition, are beyond the powers of human to control. So this is where we are. It's like a double planet system so you are in a chaotic situation. We turn around, and now if you try to make this completely bizarre metaphor of a Copernican revolution stable, you will explain to me how this thing works. Because you turn around, a planet will turn around you, and the whole thing goes in this sort of set of instability which has been calculated for double planet. And that's a very troubling situation, which is why we have to register a situation which is slightly different. And again, here, which is really interesting in exploring how artists do that, is to try to do that through works of art as well as from works of science, which is what this part of the show was doing. Here it's a show, it's a piece by Pierre Huyghe, which is supposed to be an impressionist painting post 21st century. 21st century, not early 20th century. He took the land and the soil from the Monet's Giverny place, but he transformed it in something you see not as a 2D painting, but as something which has become a 3D, highly fragile and complex small ecosystem, in this case an aquarium, which cost us a fortune actually to maintain, but that's another question. And we had to get into the German protection of axolot. These are axolot, this little thing there, which apparently the German care for enormously. And we had to go through all sort of routine in order to maintain the temperature and so on for the axolot not to be working too long. So we had to discuss the 10 hours working load for each of these axolot in this thing here. What was really interesting was to try to see how it changed the way we look at a piece of impressionist painting when it has become a 3D, fragile, expensive, complex ecosystem with the algae, and in addition, where most of the time you didn't see a thing because of the way the images and the optic was done and the way the sort of rhythm of lighting was organized. Rhythm of lighting, which has itself linked to Monet's 4 years at Giverny painting the Nymphia. So it became actually, as we move through the show, a sort of very important ways of trying to come to grips with what it is to be and to see the land on which we reside, not as a globe, but precisely as a layer, as a thin layer. What it is to be on a thin layer, this is what I'm really interested. This is one of my obsessions right now. Reading Tim Lenton, who is, remind you, is the only student, one of the only students, or one of the best successor of Jim Lovelock. For many Earth system scientists, the planet Earth is really comprised of two systems. The surface Earth system that supports life and the great bulk of the inner Earth underneath. It is the thin layer of the system at the surface of the Earth and its remarkable property that is the subject of my work. Now, this thin layer seems to be not registered in our definition of what we live on the globe. And it's these thin layers, which is, of course, the thin layers in time as well, which is the Anthropocene, but now so much has been done on the Anthropocene, I don't need to belabor the point, which I'm interested in, which is how you actually, is there any way in which we can shift from nature to what some of the scientists I'm studying now with call critical zone. They are what I call critical zonists, a mixture of soil science, agronomy, biochemistry, which they are doing using this word of critical zone. And I'm back to the old days of laboratory life now, studying them and actually working with them. Because they are as puzzled as I are. They are trying to understand, this is this is the only best pictures I could find. This is actually a table in Singapore, but I was interested that we are here. It's a thin layer, the varnish. All of that, let's call it nature. All of that, let's call it nature. But what is this is something else. And what I'm really interested as a science student and historian of science partially, is that the regime of politics and science is very different in these three areas. Because when we deal with what Lenton says, the great bulk, which is inside, we have no direct access. We have to go through instruments. You can say that you have your own view of the way the Earth functions, but you won't be taken seriously because there would be no epistemological dispute which can be credible on that. You can have conspiracy theory, of course, about the fact that the Earth is empty, that sort of thing, but you won't be in a meeting with scientists talking about simultaneously iron core and empty Earth. Same thing for what is there. Now here, we are in a regime of epistemological conflict. And I'm very interested now in using this distinction, basically reusing this old notion of physis, which was the notion that we had before the Copernican Galilean revolution, to account for generation and death, which is processes, basically. And here, that's a zone of conflict. This is unnecessarily a zone of epistemological conflict, because every time you talk about anything like the climate, you immediately have oil and coal industry, farmers, all sorts of other people who are disputing the claim. And that's good. There is no other way. I mean, yeah, these guys are silly, but it is a normal state of affair, which is so in other words, the science and society dispute is not the same here, here, and here. I think we should, this is one proposition I make of how we ended up. Basically, it's as if we had expanded in the old days. Physics was expanded to everything too fast. But then the opposite is also true of a sort of Galilean word. It was expanded too fast, as if we were looking at the Earth as if it was a body among many other bodies, which is not the case. We are not a body among other bodies as far as we are here. And that's not only just because of a lived word. This is not only a Husserlian point about the Earth that doesn't move. It's actually the way also the science is actually working here. And the science is not exactly the same in terms of its access, instrumentation, and epistemological and public conflict. So maybe it's something which we can say, which is that the physis is actually here. It's very, very thin layers. Let's call it Gaia. The word is very good. Where the notion of processes, generation, death, all of the other processes, as well as the one which have been discovered in the Galilean nature, are there. And you understand why it's so different from the globe. It's not the same to be global or to be on these thin layers of activity, fragile activity, where all the processes and all the disputes are actually activated. And that's why, to finish, we try to find in this exhibition a way to landing in time and space. And John Palmesino had made a very beautiful, because all of those things are supposed to be a museum of oil. That is, the way you would see in the future, you would take your kids and you will bring them to a museum of oil, and the kids will marvel at the utter stupidity of these people who had done this amazing oil extraction system. But of course, you don't know if this is a vision of a future, or, I mean, it's certainly a vision of a present, but it's also maybe a vision of a future. And they had the idea of slightly slanting this gigantic aluminum print. So you were there and you enter those, and you never knew if these things were going to fall on your face or not. And they were amazingly interesting in terms of the data which has been accumulated by territorial agency. So we are back where I started, which is how, if I'm even vaguely right, how can we sort of reset instrumentation to detect that when people say not going to the globe is reactionary or going to the land of old is populist, we are actually telling entirely different signal and sending completely different signal. You understand what I'm also alluding to a recent event in England here, which is that when you accuse people of being reactionary and archaic because they want to go to the land, we all know the land doesn't exist, of course. It's, well, let's say, okay, the land of shrunk England does not exist, okay? But the globe doesn't exist either. So we are accusing of populism people who are actually taken into utopia. The globe, which everyone knows doesn't work because there's no planet corresponding, and the land of all which will never be back. Okay? So it seems it's a responsibility of trying to find out then where and when are we if we land back on a third place, which we can call the Earth. But the Earth of the Anthropocene is not the globe. The Earth Anthropocene is not the land of all, and it's not at the same time. To be in the Anthropocene is not the same to be, even there are many disputes about that, in the Holocene. So this is the sort of thing I'm now interested in exploring with the scientists who call themselves critical zone specialists. And I thank you very much for listening to my little thing. I was not long.
Okay, thank you very much, Bruno. Now, the inspiration for this event was, in a way, my curiosity, which was what is it like if you are somebody who has done a great deal of very important work over many years, to have somebody summarize it in a single book. And that's the puzzle for me, and how do you react to that, and so on. So that's the basic sense of it. And I think what I'd like to do after a moment is to have a conversation, or to moderate a conversation between our two stars. But first of all, in order to fulfill the anthropological need for ritual, I think we should have a formal presentation of the book by Gerard to its subject.
I
And then you say something.
I'm the subject.
You're a subject.
Yeah, wait for it.
Should I sit or should I stand?
I think you should stand.
First sit. I'll call you to attention. Well, let me first thank John Norton and for organizing this event and Crash for hosting it.
Can I drink?
Yes. I'd like to advertise my book a bit. And the stuff that Bruno has been talking about is not in the book. And the only way to read about it in my book is that there is a second edition. And that second edition will only come when all of you, buy this beautiful book. I think the book is about Bruno Latour's work and presents him as what I call an empirical philosopher. And an empirical philosopher is someone who, in the first place, suggests a vocabulary and a technique to redescribe the world we live in, with the purpose of making visible that what we fail to see because it is too intimate to us. That's the philosophy part, and it's an empirical philosopher in the sense that the redescriptions have to be informed by empirical work, in particular by ethnography or history. Now, this idea of empirical philosophy is not just an aberration of French writers like Foucault and Bruno. I think it's appropriate in this city to cite one of the great sons of Cambridge, Wittgenstein, who wrote, "We want to understand something that is already in view. We must do away with all explanation. Description alone must take its place." But where Wittgenstein limited his attention to studying language games, Latour grabbed the bull by its horns, erased from his armchair, and did a lot of real fieldwork. Now, the idea of the book is to do a kind of Latour on Latour. That is, the book follows the actor, points out some routes that are not taken. It provides some background that may help understanding. And I think the important thing is that it gives equal time to Bruno's philosophy and his empirical work. So it shows him from his early days as a student fighting, in a sense, with the Protestant theologian Bultmann and the abstruse poet Pigui. His work, of course, for decades in science and technology studies, on making of law and on the torments of religious speech, up to his most recent books, The Inquiry into Modes of Existence and Fasa Gaia. Now, of course, to write a book of 200 pages about 50 years of someone's hard work seems to be completely unfair. But it turns out that there is a powerful heuristic behind this work. As a thread of Ariadne, it helped Bruno to get through a labyrinth of themes: science, technology, law, religion, the arts, modernity, you name it, without getting lost. The ambition of the book, this is just the advertisement, is to help the reader get a feel for this heuristic and to ease access to what Latour claims to be a different, better, richer common sense. And thus to develop with Bruno a picture of the world we live in, the modern world of science, technology, rule of law, religion, etc., in a finer resolution than what is available elsewhere. Now, to write about a prolific and still very productive author who continues to surprise us time and again, is of course a rather unquiet affair. Someone had to do it, and I volunteered. So it's a real pleasure and an honor to be able to give the first copy of the book here in Cambridge to the one and only Bruno Latour.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions before we kick off. Question for Gerard first. I said jokingly that you knew Bruno Latour before he was cool. When did you first meet him? And how did this all start?
As far as I can remember, we met in person first in 1984 in Twente University, where Wiebe Bijker had organized a workshop on the social construction of technological systems. But before that, I had read Laboratory Life, and I don't know why, just before that, Bruno had sent me a copy of Les Microbes, the book on Pasteur. And I had started reading that book when we met. So I had a feeling, my background was philosophy of science. I had then done a dissertation on the philosophy of social science. One of the main points of that dissertation is that you should take description more serious than explanation. Another point in that dissertation was I had an interest in Tolstoy's War and Peace as a kind of challenge to sociology. So when I got this Les Microbes, which is inspired by Tolstoy, I had a feeling that, okay, we're dealing here with a philosopher and not only with a sociology of science. So that's basically, I don't know what happened. Out of that conference came a very popular book about the social construction of technological systems. But your paper was not in in that book. I don't know who rejected it. I didn't do it. Really? Anyway.
I'm in that book.
You're not in the book.
No.
This is an empirical matter.
Michel Calon is in the book. Okay.
Bruno, Gerard says in the book at one point that for a long time you were more famous abroad than you were in France. A, is this true? And B, what reason might there be for that?
This is embarrassing. The French have difficulty with me because they think I'm criticizing science, and they are very scientific in a rationalist version, not an empiricist version. They probably used to be, not so much now, but the more modernist outlook. They still believe that, they are modernizing France crosses France every day, so to speak, and move on. And there's one absolutely taboo question, is to be interested in religion positively. So when you mix the three, it's difficult to register the pluralism of mode of existence and trying to register. I think the test would be if I manage to have a book of translated in French, okay, which I really hope to, but so far I didn't succeed, but I hope so.
So for the time being, a Légion d'honneur escapes you?
No, I turned out I have a Légion d'honneur, but it's because I was a vice president of my school.
Okay.
So not for any sort of scientific reason. It was actually given by the Minister of Culture for my work as a curator, not as a scientist.
Okay. So you need a second one?
No, you cannot. You can move up.
The other thing was that as I read Gerard's book when it was in draft, and one thing that struck me was the way in which this very important characteristic of your work, where there's this streak of philosophical, there's a combination of philosophical reflection and field work. And is it is it true? Is it fair to say that over the years, the fieldwork has reduced in proportion, and the philosophical reflection has increased? Or are you reversing the process again?
Well, now I'm back to fieldwork, but it's because I'm going to be retired and then no longer have administrative responsibility. But it's in our field, I think many of historians of science students would say the same. What is fun is fieldwork. And yet the work of philosophy has to be done, and largely actually because of the reception we had on our earlier work. We have never been modern is actually the consequence of amazement at seeing that we were accused of criticizing science, which was completely bizarre for me and for my colleagues. We never thought that it was a debunking, so to speak. But the fact of seeing people and interpret pushed me into more philosophy than I needed. Now, this is not probably a very honest question. I'm a philosopher since I'm 17, and my first class of philosophy, I said, that's me. So, in fact, I'm a philosopher. But I'm trying to see, I think this is why, for me, the great generosity with which Gerhard wrote this book, but also the great, I think, service it does to people interested in my work, is that it's to show, which has never been done before, that the empirical work and the philosophy mixed together, because it's a method, like exhibition is a method. To get at question you cannot really tackle using the philosophical language itself, at least in my tradition, which is the French tradition, which is itself very diverse. So this is why but still in my mind I'm a philosopher doing fieldwork. So I've not moved on that, I think.
Gerard, I said in my introduction that from as long as I've known you, you've been committed to the idea that a philosophical perspective is a useful way of thinking about public affairs. And then you had said that for many years, and then in 2004 the Dutch Queen, I think, says, well, hi De Vries, you've been saying this for a long time. Now why don't you join the Scientific Council and put it into action? Was that kind of thinking something that ran through your work at the council?
Yes, and no. The first thing you should realize that in Holland, when you say you are a philosopher, people look at you with the eyes that there must have been something very terrible happening in your youth. In France, you're
a noble state of affairs.
You're the king, but in Holland, you're a silly and poor. So I have to hide. So when people ask what are you doing, I'm saying, okay, I was trained as an engineer, which is true. And that means in Holland you're a serious person. But in fact, let me give an example. The latest report which we did was on food policy. Now, in that report, which I directed the group who wrote the report, we used, in fact, a sort of kindergarten version of actor network theory. In that sense, if you look into the international literature about food and about the problems of food security and so on the covers of all these reports, you see pictures either of agricultural chickens and happy chickens, or you see children who are overweight. Yeah, the other serious health problem. Now, the fact is that this division in reports is also a division in political attention to the problem. Agriculture and distribution of food is a matter for the Ministry of Economics here in England, the DEFRA. The health problems related to food are, of of course, is something for the health ministry. Now, what we did is, in a sense, redefine what is food by simply saying, okay, what is food? Food is that what you find on the shelves of a supermarket. And if you look, and the next question is, how does that food, how does those products come up on that shelves, and how are they, and tell me in what kind of context it is used, which is a, as I said, kindergarten version of actor network theory. By doing that, we succeeded in reshuffling, in a sense, a lot of the politics about food, to set another agenda for foods. And I'm happy to say that the Dutch government has adopted that report as the basis for its future politics. It will advertise that also in Europe, but don't be afraid, after Brexit you will not have to do with that. But so it's there is, so I cannot do that work without the kind of thinking that I do in my study and that I teach as a philosophy professor in Amsterdam. But you will not find any reference to Bruno's work in a report that I send out to the Dutch cabinet. Because as soon as I would do that, then I'm done. Yeah.
I talked to the Queen, though, and she was very kind with me.
Yeah.
She said, I'm not supposed to say anything because I'm the Queen, but I find you very funny.
Yeah.
But I don't think, can I ask,
Yeah,
because
please do.
I have to ask you a question, because it seems to me that this work on myself, slightly strange,
yes,
but was influenced by your daily interest in the consequence of science studies for politics. So what Gerhard did, I mean in the same field as you are, John, is that to shift the attention of STS, where it was always for us very important, to the politics, the public, basically the state of a polity where, polity, the title of our publisher, the state of a polity where those science and technology can enter. So I think, for me, if I'm remembering our many conversations, the interest of Gerhard in all this field was very different before, when it remained sort of philosophical, and after the experience of being the Queen advisor, because then it meant that the politics and everything we tried to do, including many of the other things which are not in the book, but which I'm doing in mapping controversy and so on, got relevance which was not visible before. And I think it's still useful for STS, which is that basically our work is about politics, where is the common word, how the progressive composition of the common word can be done.
One more question before I throw it open. Bruno, at Sciences Po, you have a media lab, and you're doing digital humanities. And that's of great interest to those of us in this institute and elsewhere again. What exactly do you mean?
Media lab with a small m, so that there is no confusion with the other media lab of a guy who do all sort of useless stuff in MIT. Was an invention of mine, not necessarily a very durable one, but to get a grasp of Gabriel Tarde. So it was a highly elaborated program to get Gabriel Tarde, sociology, and the internet mixed. Basically, I saw the internet as a way to operationalize the sociology of Gabriel Tarde, which I'd mounted as a contrast with that of Durkheim. So it was, even though it's a media lab now, we are 30 people. I mean, it's a big institution. I mean, not big, but it does a lot of things and lots of software and all sorts of things. The idea was that the traceability of the social had been modified by the internet in a way that vindicated many of the insights that Gabriel Tarde had, but had been sort of kicked out because it was doing it just with his own prose, so to speak. Especially the key notion of monad. So it's basically a lab built around the notion of monad, which is not a very good way to raise money, but it's my own interest. But now I'm retiring from it, and it will be something different, and media study and humanities.
Okay.
But it was a good invention. We published a couple of important papers on that.
Okay. Now the floor is yours. If you want to make a comment or ask a question, could you put up your hand so I can log where you are, and then try and make an ordered list. Who would like to start?
This is on the sort of the first presentation. I wonder if, Bruno, I can get you to pull together two things that I was having trouble connecting. So one was this kind of idea of the place that we live, in some sense, being very, very fragile. This is something that we've kind of learnt. And there's this kind of, we can sort of put this in very simple terms, which is something like our technological prowess is massively outrunning our scientific understanding. So we kind of we've got all these powerful things, and we've not a very good idea about what they'll do other than probably bad things. So that's a kind of problem. Then there's this other aspect, sort of the main thing you're talking about. I take it was something like, there's this very unhelpful dichotomy that we've been kind of working with, which is the sort of progressive left-wingy one and the sort of right-wingy conservative one. And those are kind of not working in some important respects, and we want to find some kind of third way. I wonder if you could sort of connect those two things for me. Is it just simply a matter of asking, like a fat-footed thing to say, well, the problem with these two things is they're not providing the political will to do what we need to fix this kind of problem with our understanding being outrun by our technology. But I take it there's more going on than that. So could you sort of help connect those two things for me?
Just one comment on third way, because third way is interesting, which was very important here in Britain, time long ago, was a projection on the line from local to global, right? So this is not a third way, it's a way where are we in time and space seems to have shifted with what is called first as basically the ecological question was a question of environment. It was this idea that it was a special problem which could be solved or not solved, and where people would say, well, it's about science and the technology. And I think what I'm trying to register is more like an anthropological crisis, which is slightly deeper than that, things which, by the way, had been anticipated by many people, including Michel Serres in The Natural Contract. But it's something more serious than that, because and one of the many serious things I'm trying to register is that is the difference between this globe and the thin layer. When you read Tim Lenton's work, which is a sort of a much more precise summary of the Earth system than Lovelock's can do, it's not nature. It's not about nature in general. It's about a highly specific, and that's where your question about fragility coming. Maybe fragility is not the word, but at least activity. It's not de-animated. And I'm trying to now to make the list of all the things which are slightly different. Not because we have to get out of a progressive reactionary line, but just we have to know which progressive going this third instead of going this one. Basically, in terms of present politics, I'm obsessed by the immense danger of accusing of populism people who actually want to go back to the land of old because they know better than anyone else that what was promised to them as the global horizon is gone. And I think it's a deep mistake of the elite, I would say, especially the French elite, to think that people have not felt that this globe is no longer there. Also because this globe is not the globe. It's a highly provincial definition of what the globe is about. So we have a confusion of metaphor, confusion of figures there between the globe, the earth, and the land. To call a whole campaign, Make America Great Again, everyone understands it's a complete myth about what is greatness, right? But then you cannot say, well, it's just because these people are deplorable, okay? That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, then they want to move, and here is the politics getting very serious. Which aligns? What are the alliances with people who say, and I heard, that the globe is no longer there. If you call them as deplorable, it goes nowhere. Do they want protection? Yes. Is it wrong to want protection? No. Which protection? Identity protection or something which is about a stand in sovereignty? And what is so striking is that just at the time when the notion of sovereignty is disputed everywhere because of the ecological crisis, the shift to border and nation states seems so important. Yet, we have to be able, okay, sovereignty is a problem. It's no longer there in the old ways of being sovereign. Yet, protection and borders, or at least immunology, as Peter Sloterdijk would say, is necessary. So we have to rework every single of those terms that were used to define in my interpretation of the modernist urge, which is the 1 to 2 movement, these movements. That's what I'm trying to say. So fragility might be a wrong word, but activity, let's say. It's not de-animated in a way which we are very surprised by. And in the quote by Oliver Morton seems to be very summarizing the point very well. Okay. We have become a forces of nature, and the force of nature is overcoming us, and we turn around, not knowing where we are. You cannot call populists those who say, we are lost. You have to say, okay, fine. Let's reset.
Thank you. Irene?
Can I just challenge you a little bit on the term, probably using your own word, the idea of reset and modernity?
Yes, you can.
There is
Reset is a dangerous, bizarre term.
well, the feeling I get is again down to the subject and object. By using reset and modernity, suggests that you are displaced.
But what?
That you are displaced.
That I'm what?
Displaced.
Displaced, angst,
I am.
shaken.
I am.
Therefore, again using the notion of subject, you are displaced. There is a reset of modernity in your eye.
Yes?
Is there truly displacement across everybody? So
Yeah, okay.
So giving your own example, only when the deplorable, called deplorable, or the people who were displaced were then made real after slavery, then suddenly the elite became displaced because their existence made known to them, displaced that world. Therefore now, suddenly there is a reaction. So I wonder how that sits in the notion of subject-object, in the way you even think about your own work.
But in the case we share angst is already a better diplomatic position than...
But would it necessitate reset?
Well, reset is an instrumental thing. I mean, the instrument... See, it's very difficult never have been modern. It means you are constantly... I mean, I've been working on that for 30 years. You are constantly on the wrong foot, so to speak. For example, let's subject-object. Where are we encounter as the example of an object of dead mummy arm? It's a very lit by a northern light at 2 meters distance at the height on the cover of a felt, green felt, which allows the visibility of a thing. It's a very beautiful, amazingly powerful images, but that's not the way we are. We register many other things, right? And that has nothing to do with the lived subjectivity compared to the objectivity. It's just one extraordinary historically determined and limited ways of being objective, right? There are many other ways of being objects in the world. And so that's a typical case. Can we share this multiplicity of ways of being objectivity with other people? And I think this is where we sort of, I mean, the we is of course a politic, that's where the reset is. That's where the exhibition is so powerful, because it's the place where people cannot, I mean, you can test. You were there in the exhibition. Sure. You can test the sublime part, the procedure sublime. Many people say, this is so beautiful when they saw the amazing set of print. there are many people who still feel that the destruction of the world is, by ecology, is a beautiful thing. And there are people who found the aluminium Museum of Oil sublime, actually, even though it was going to fall on them. And, so a reset is a proposition to people who register things which are very strange differently. That's all it says. So
what's fascinating about it to me is the way in which some of these ideas have suddenly acquired a new contemporary resonance. I mean, I think, for example, if you take Brexit, the vote for Brexit, interesting comparison. Cambridge voted 70-30 to remain, and Stoke-on-Trent voted the other way, 70-30.
yeah,
okay.
Simon mentioned that. Yes,
Right.
amazing.
Well, it is amazing. But if you look more deeply into it, and you say, if you go to Stoke, and I know it quite well, you find a large community which has been devastated by, quote, globalization.
Mm.
But the interesting thing is that almost everybody who has been so displaced knows what form that globalization took. Because what happened is that one after another, these people, very skilled, often working in ceramics and pottery companies, because once every bit of tableware that we used in the world more or less came from Stoke, and now none of it does. But what happened, they saw it happen time and time again. The company for which they worked was taken over by a bigger company, and in the end, production was outsourced to China. So the only thing that's now made in Stoke is sanitary ware, toilets and stuff. Okay. Now,
Which is useful, but not.
Those people have the point about it is that their conceptualization of globalization is very concrete. They know what it is. What I don't know is what conception of globalization they, for example, the people who live inside this particular elite bubble, which is called Cambridge, have.
But that's I think why the word which is often used in the newspaper, left aside by globalization, and that explains why these people have voted in the wrong way. We share that the globalization is impossible. So these people are right.
Yeah.
So that already established a discussion, a diplomatic discussion point which is possible, which is not if you, I mean, this is I'm trying to argument, where basically the situation is exactly the same as in the 16th century. This is why we are, Simon and I, so interested by the Anthropocene as 1610, as a date for 1610. We are back to a situation where suddenly the question of where we are, on which land and in which period, is being perturbated. So this is why there might be, let's say, I'm very interested in the diplomatic aspect of the question you raised. There might be a different level playing field among people who criticize the extraordinary provincial definition of a global, from the people who vote 70% for the Brexit and 30% against the Brexit, which is not the same as dividing them along the 1 to 2 line of my little simplified diagram. If there is a third attractor, which is again a place which we have to be invented in the same way as the 1 and the 2, but which is in a way also to restart this very essential aspect of politics, which is, in spite of what Clive Hamilton say, hope and future and progress, which still has to, but progressing to the third attractor is not the same as progressing to the global. That's why I think, and it's really interesting that it's not about the lived world opposed to the globe of finance and economy. It is actually scientifically enormously interesting layers, these thin layers. And that's what I'm trying to articulate by the new fieldwork I'm doing.
Could you say a little more about 1610? That was
No.
obscure, I suspect.
Well, I'm sorry. Among the many disputes around the Anthropocene, appeared last year, I think in February 2015, by two guys from Cambridge, actually. Yeah, they are from Cambridge, Martin. And another date for the Anthropocene, which is a very disputed thing, which is that in 1610 there has been a CO2 dip of quite sensational proportion, which they attribute to the reforestation of the what was not the United States, of the American continent itself, which is beautiful, associated with the elimination of 10 million Indian by the 15 million Indian by what is called the Colombian transition, the Colombian exchange. Well, it's a strange word, Colombian exchange, for the extermination of 15 million people. So this is a typical of a thing we have to deal with. The Colombian elimination of 15 million and a reforestation, immense amount of CO2 captured by the reforestation, and these guys who says, well, maybe we should date from this time the Anthropocene, which of course has some, Oliver Morton is for the 1610, and so is Simon, right? Well, we are not in the committee, of course. The stratigraphic committee is actually not as enthusiastic about all these questions, precisely because instead of geologists discussing serious geological questions, there are people like me interested in it, which is a bad sign for a geologist, probably.
Are the real reactionaries, the intellectuals who are quite happy with the way things were, flying around the world, having cheap flights and enjoying globalisation? Because I live in Leeds, which, remained one, but by 2,000 votes, so it was very close. So you can't just say in Leeds, oh, all the people who voted to leave were thick or morons or their job went or whatever. In fact, I live in a postcode that almost certainly was like 99% leave because I live in a poor area. And most of those people just wanted something to change.
It's what?
They just wanted something to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are many other.
They didn't want things to stay the same. They didn't care if everything exploded. They didn't know what would happen. They didn't understand what the EU word was. They don't really know any immigrants or any people who are not white. They just wanted something to change.
Mm-hmm. No, there are many
that's progression in its way, even if they wanted to set it all on fire and vote for Trump.
Before I forget it, a question for Gerard. If you look at the book, it says Latour. And if you don't know anything about it, you think, hey, this is a biography. But it isn't. And I'm wondering, if you're doing this, how do you try and disconnect, as it were, the chronological arc of Bruno's life, or do you try and correlate it with the development of his thought, or does it not matter?
In terms of the research, it's about his thought. If you want to do a biography, you have to
drink wine.
Know more about his personal life, and you need, of course, that's another kind of book, and another kind of research. What I have been thinking about is whether I should try to speculate about Bruno's background. Well, the wine, for example. You're a son of Burgundy. Now, and I was tempted to it. This is perhaps. I was tempted to it when I saw. I think a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, the beautiful documentary called "A Year in Burgundy," which followed the production of wine in Burgundy for a year. All kind of disasters happened, hailstorms and so on. And when I saw that documentary, my thought was, okay, this is Bruno's world. Because to grow wine, you need a lot of care. You need to attend to the soil. You have to take all kind of chaos and uncertainties about the weather into account. It's also science, it's also technology, it's also economics, so everything comes together. So for 2 or 3 weeks, I tried to write part of a chapter on with this as an entrance to get things going.
I'm glad you didn't do it.
No, and I was wise to not to do
Biography
it.
is a fraud. Because
Yeah, no. So
you could have visited Bonn, and in Bonn, all my youth was between two statues. One by Monge, which is on Place Monge. Monge, as you know, is the inventor of descriptive geometry. And the other one is Marais, and Marais is the inventor of cinematographic. The opposite of cinematography.
Yeah.
So when I visit, every time I visit Bonn with friends, they will say, this is why you are being obsessed by immutable mobile and inscription, etc. And then you had Pasteur, which is, of course, essential to the why. Which means biography is always wrong. It's completely mistake. There's absolutely no causality is always sort of invented.
Okay, so
so I'm very glad you didn't invent.
So we leave that to somebody else, and he's going to be on a disaster.
But the world, I find, the world divides into two types of people, and the test is, what does the word Latour mean to them? If they know anything about philosophy, it's Bruno. Most of the people, I'm afraid, it's Chateau Latour and Bruno.
I didn't get that.
It's very good wine, yes.
It's very good wine, yeah.
No, that you can explain that my complex is my wine is always better and better known than my books. Yes, and that is a feeling of frustration that made me become a philosopher. That's up for grabs. You can invent any biography that you wish.
But so the more serious point is that I do think, very bad people can write very beautiful novels. So we have to separate the person from the work.
Sloterdijk invented a complete biography of mine out of nothing, out of one pictures of my parents. And he wrote 50 pages of invented biography out of that.
Yeah,
Everything is false. Every single thing is false.
Okay.
But he was very pleased with it.
Yes. Time for about 2. Simon, do you want to say?
2 was first. Thanks. Bruno, there's something you seemed to say, and I wanted to check. So I think you said that the thin skin is this area of particularly acute epistemological conflict, with the implication that there's a lot less or maybe no conflict going on in everything else, which is a big area.
Yes, the big.
Now, one obvious response to that is to say, well, no, there are highly politicized disputes, certainly about scientific claims that pertain to things that are not located in the thin skin, sunspots, asteroid strikes, the singularity which may happen nowhere at all. Now then you might say, oh no, but the reason why we care about those things is because they make a difference to us and we're on the thin skin. But I take it that wasn't all you meant when you said that, or maybe it was.
I played against my camp. You might be perfectly right. I was just trying to, but I'm ready to abandon my idea very quickly. But it's a different, it seems to me it's a different type of debate, and different people who are interested. It's very clear in Morton's book, between those who are interested in the possible destruction of asteroid by the American or the Chinese thing, which is of course a highly political thing. It's not the same numbers of people with the same interest as those who are interested in GMO, let's say, where the conflicting, or for that matter, in the case of the climato-skeptics about climate. So I just wanted to find a way to alert, because I think also it's a different type of scientist. I'm very surprised by the tone, rhythm, openness of all these people who are, I'm calling them critical zonists working. They seem to be very different from the other scientists I've studied, because precisely they handle the Anthropocene situation in a different ways. And I try to find a term to register these differences, but I agree. If I think 5 minutes, I agree with you also on the fact that this thing. Yet we can have a nuance between this vast. See, nature is a bit too big to handle these questions. So if we had a sort of more limited notion, that thin layers Lenton speaks about, I think it will be a gain. If not, you are immediately shifting all the discussion about nature in general from here to the Big Bang, and that's a big for the political discussion about what it is and when. So I just want to have a nuanced version of where a sort of local natures with something like that. But this is work in progress. I'll tell more in 2 years.
Yeah, this is probably too general a question for the ambient humidity. I'm extremely struck that both of you are fans and celebrators of description rather than explanation. There's a very respectable philosophical tradition that says only explanation provides a resource for normative interventions. Description cannot do that. And it seems to me that one of the things you have in common, and it comes through in Gerard's book extremely well, is that one seems to have been able to work out a way of making description a resource for policy. And that, for a lot of agents in our world, is a huge surprise, since they earn their living by saying that merely to re-describe does not provide you with motives for a particular policy initiative. What you've done, and your colleagues with Reset Modernity, and what Gerard brings out in the book, is, it seems to me, not just a particular set of interventions in a particular set of godforsaken crises that have erupted here since the 23rd of June, but a way of thinking about how description can become a weapon. And I know for Bruno, the term of choice at the moment for that is diplomacy.
Diplomat
Very,
is a redescriber.
very weird word to use right now. So I'd love it, we surely don't have time, if you could both say something about the fact that you got here through a celebration of description against explanation. That seems very striking to me.
Before I start, there's just a paper we call me serial redescriptor.
A serial
Redescriptor.
Right. How are you spelling serial?
I do think that you're right on the point. Well, I do think that the point here is the kind of problematic where you start. Are we talking about knowledge, description, explanation about the world, or are we talking about knowledge, description in the world? In the Reset Modernity exhibition, it's within or without, and that's a crucial thing, I think. So, in fact, in this beautiful book,
It is a beautiful book.
I do think that the crucial point where Bruno diverted from, say, the social constructivist sociological version of epistemology was in the Pasteur book, Pasteurization of France, and precisely on that he was not interested in that book, what Pasteur had to say about the world, but he was interested in a book about what is Pasteur's knowledge within that world. And I do think it also connects to the to Tim's question. So when we're talking about nature, you're talking about knowledge and science and so on. You're talking about knowledge about something. Whereas when you're talking about physics and the kind of sciences, then you're talking about sciences within the world, their role. And I agree. I don't think it's only in soil. But so take a difference between medical people and biomedicines researchers, also there you see a different kind of attitude, a different kind of way of talking about what they're dealing with. A doctor can describe your status, and it's immediately also in a normative. You're not very healthy. So that's the normative descriptive connection is how do you embed that question in a kind of problematic, and as soon as you have it without, okay, then we have Hume and and everything you learn in philosophy 101. But as soon as you're talking about the role of knowledge within, then it's a different ballgame.
I think it's also that, as you yourself said, that the work of a diplomat, which is for me the new name of social sciences, is actually redescription. That's why it's so efficient. It's the subtle redescription that unblock or on contrary block. So redescription is, I mean, maybe not a weapon, but it is one of the ways in which the playing field, what I call the common ground, using the book by White, can be built. So it is actually linked to the notion of description. I mean, as I think this is another definition of anthropology, right?
Okay, I want to pick up on Simon's point about the ambient humidity.
There's a climate question here.
This is a climate question. I think at this point, in fairness to everybody, we should stop. Because outside there are some rehydration possibilities.
That's good, we can drink.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to thank all of you for coming and for sticking with us in this very hot room. And I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking these